So now that we've had a little bit of fun with this tabbed example, let's go ahead, grab our selection tool, select the object, go ahead and delete it for now, and let's also close up our Pathfinder panel group. Grab the rectangular frame tool and we will draw a frame, make it a rectangular frame, not a square frame, a rectangular frame. And let's go ahead and put an image inside this frame because as we make various transformations, it'll be easier to see the results. So let's choose File, Place. Again, navigate to the Links folder of Lesson 3, Part 2 of your project files. I'm going to grab the 05 Landscapes file again. Go ahead and click Open. And up here inside of the Control panel, I'll click Fill Frame Proportionally. Actually, that's not quite what I had in mind. Instead, let's choose this option right here that will fit the content proportionally. Now we'll grab the bottom right-hand corner of this frame. We'll do that with the selection tool. That's the black arrow. And we'll use that to basically crop this image, and we'll crop it down on the top a little bit as well. Now, something like that will work quite nicely. Now, there are several ways to transform an object. The most obvious way to make these changes is to go to the Object menu, choose Transform, and look at the long list of options here. Move, Scale, Rotate, Shear, various rotations, and flipping commands. Most of these are pretty obvious. Let's just do a simple example. Let's choose Object, Transform, Scale. I'll move this over to the side. I'll turn on Preview so we can see the results, and maybe we type 75% and tab over. Well, the object just changed by 25%. It got 25% smaller. It's now 75% of its original size. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and cancel and not actually do that change because we have a couple of other options to look at. Now, in addition to these pretty obvious transform commands, we also have corresponding commands here in the control panel. Again, we have the ability to change attributes including location, size, scale, rotation, shear. We haven't really looked at an example of that. Let's do negative 20% or positive 30%. To be honest with you, I don't ever use this, but you can if you want to, and now you know where to find it. I'll set this back to 0, and these icons up here are new and pretty interesting in how they work inside of InDesign CS3. We can rotate an image. Pretty self-explanatory. We can go the other way if we'd like to. Not only do we see the change here in our layout, but if we had an empty frame and we weren't sure which way we had rotated it, this little proxy here, this capital letter P, kind of gives us an indication of what's going on with the content. Additionally, we have flipping, so we can flip horizontal and back, and we can flip vertically, so we'll look at the world upside down. Click that again, and it'll go right side up. Now, over here in the toolbar, we also have a lot of other transform tools. Essentially, these do the same thing. We have rotation, we have scale, shear, and a free transform tool. What's slightly different about the way the rotation tool works compared to the options up here is that you have some nice control over the rotation proxy point. That is the pivot point for the rotation. Now, if I come up here and rotate this object, say 30 degrees, it rotates 30 degrees, pretty obvious. I'm going to undo that, Control Z on Windows, Command Z on Mac, and this time I'm going to use the rotation tool, but before I enter a value, I'm going to click on the image, and instead of being at the center, I can put the pivot point anywhere I want. Now if I double click the rotation tool or just click and drag, we can now see where that object is pivoting from. Now, if I want to pivot from that point but at a specific angle, I would hold the Shift key, and that would constrain the angle of motion to 45-degree increments. If I want to use a specific angle, I could double-click the rotation tool, turn on Preview, and type in something obscure, maybe negative 18 degrees from where we're at, and you can see the results there in the layout. Now, fortunately, we have multiple undo, so I might undo those last couple of changes to get back to an upright rendition of that file. Now go ahead and press Ctrl-0 on Windows or Command-0 on Mac to zoom out. Grab your black arrow, that's your selection tool, and move this object up here towards the top of the page. Now we're going to do a little experiment with transformations. Let's grab the frame tool, and click over here in the right column of this page. Now what we want to do is we want to create a simple square, 1 inch by 1 inch. When you've entered those values, go ahead and click OK. There's our square. Now we want to create a couple more renditions of that same square. So under the Edit menu, choose Step and Repeat. So what we're going to do here is tab over to the horizontal offset. I don't want to move it left and right, so I'll set that to 0. Now remember, this shape is 1 inch tall. So let's set the vertical offset to 1 inch. That means they'll be stacked on top of each other just perfectly. Now we'll turn on Preview, and you can see because the repeat count is set to 4, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more of them. So we have 5 1-inch shapes stacked perfectly. That's a good place to start for these next steps. Go ahead and click OK. Now with the selection tool, choose this frame up top that has the image placed in it, and we're going to make 2 changes to this frame. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to shrink it to 75%. So type 75 here in the control panel. Make sure that the link icon is activated and press Tab or Return or Enter to invoke that change. And we just shrunk that down a little bit. Now in the rotation field, let's rotate this by 15 degrees and go ahead and press Tab to invoke that change. So 2 simple changes. We shrunk it, we rotated it. Now, considering that those were our last 2 steps, let's select these other 5 shapes and see how we can apply those same transformations to other objects on the page. Let's go back up to the Object menu, and you'll remember the transform commands that we already looked at. Underneath that is Transform Again. So let's choose the first command, Transform Again. Remember, what was the last step we did? We rotated it 15 degrees. So let's see what that does to these 5 objects. Do you see what happened there? We took that 15-degree rotation and applied it to all of the selected objects as a group. But, of course, there are other options. Let's undo that. Control-Z on Windows, Command-Z on the Mac. Go to the Object menu, Transform Again. Instead, we will transform again individually. Choose that option. See the results. So it did that 15-degree rotation on each individual square. Let's undo that, and we have just 2 more options to understand. Going back to Object, Transform Again. This time, we're going to transform the sequence again. So remember the last 2 steps? We scaled and rotated the image of the mountain. So let's do that to the entire group, and you can see the effect there. Let's undo that and choose the last option. Object, Transform Again, Transform Sequence, again individually. I know this is a mouthful. You'll probably have to play with this a little bit on your own to get the concepts of what's happening here, but this will take the last 2 transform steps, the scale and the rotation, apply it to each of the 5 squares individually, and this is the result. So imagine if you've brought in a photograph and you've made some adjustments to it inside your layout, and then you have 10 more of the same style of photograph. Instead of making those changes on each individual item, you can do it to one image, get it dialed in just perfectly, and then apply those transformations to all of the other images in that layout.